Hello and welcome to this lecture. This is a supplemental lecture on the elements of fiction, and it's going to be a series of small lectures on different parts of fiction. So we are going to be identifying and analyzing the basic elements of fiction and applying them to a short Pixar film. It's going to be La Luna, a really cute little one, and in an upcoming slide I'll give you a link there so you can watch it on YouTube. It's only about 6 minutes long, maybe a little bit longer, and it'll serve as just a really great narrative that we can look at and we'll be able to really analyze in this set of lectures. We're going to be looking at a number of elements of fiction. These aren't the only things that happen when you have a fictional work, and they don't happen only in fiction. We also see a number of these showing up in non-fictional works as well, so really it's dealing with narrative. We're going to look at plot, character, setting, point of view, symbolism, theme, and then we'll touch just a little bit on style, tone, and irony. So, here is La Luna. It's a very, like I said, very cute, very short little Pixar film from 2011, and here is the link for you. This is going to be really the basis of a lot of our application here, so it's a great one to look at. If you don't have a chance to get into that and really looking at that, that's also fine. You should be able to follow along, no problem. But like I said, I want us to have some sort of touchstone that we can have along the way and use that well. So we will begin with plot. Plot is the author's arrangement of incidents in a story. So if you think about narrative or you think about the story itself, the story is what happened. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. But when we put it into a plot, we don't necessarily tell everything and we don't necessarily tell it all in the same way. We don't necessarily start with the beginning and go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one. The plot is the more stylized element of it, what the writer, what the director, what whoever is in charge of this artistic narrative is doing with it. If you have watched the show Seinfeld at all, there is a really interesting episode that they produced, and that is an episode that is told backwards. So you actually start at the end of the episode and you have a series of scenes. And instead of getting these scenes from beginning to end, you keep going back 10 minutes, a number of hours, maybe a day, and it's really interesting to see how things develop in reverse. You have one character, Kramer, who's eating a lollipop, one of those giant ones that I think you can get at like Disneyland and such. And so we have him beginning with almost just a stick, and then it grows in each of these scenes as he goes backwards through this set of days that the episode is covering. So that is one where the story, moving forward, is actually very different from the plot, which just literally moves backwards. Now, that's not going to be the case for most of the things we study, but it's a great idea to think about how the events and the sequence of events might be a little bit different from the plot. That's where we really get into what's happening. Plot is also based in cause and effect. So it's something where it's not just this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and telling us that this is a chronological order. It's also about showing what makes something else happen. What are the causes? What are the effects? E.M. Forster has a really fantastic and famous distinction. He talks about narrative as something that would be as simple as the king died and the queen died. But if you want to move into plot for him, the king died and the queen died of grief gives that causal relationship between the two. It's not just one happens, the next happens. It's one happens and causes the next to happen. There are also other approaches that we can consider when we think about plot. Many plots are what we can talk about as realistic. That means it's literal and the meaning there is just very upfront on the surface. It is representing a world that is very similar to the world we live in. Another approach, however, is the surrealistic. Whenever I think of surrealism, I think of Salvador Dali, so I think of visual arts and some of those melting clocks and things like that that are just really surreal. And the idea in surrealism is that it's not the realistic, literal meaning of what's happened as much as the symbolic meaning. The symbolic meaning of a plot can really go in a lot of different directions, and we can actually even get mixing of these two types of plots. In La Luna, we actually get a really interesting interplay because in some ways it's very realistic. It's this little boy who is gone with his father and his grandfather on the first day of work, and he's getting trained for an occupation. But the fact that the first day of work is on the moon and he's sweeping up stars that have fallen onto the moon that adds in a bit of the surrealism, and we actually get a lot that's happening symbolically there rather than just literally. A well-told story often will follow a particular type of plot trajectory. Now, we don't have to necessarily follow this in this line completely, and another thing is this is the very reductive version of a plot. Generally, you're going to get a number of these kind of rises and falls, rises and falls, rises and falls that are going to lead up to that eventual climax of the story, and you can also consider it in different ways. What I've done here is I've mapped out for us La Luna, and I've done that just on the basis of mostly what's happening in the plot and not as much on the basis with what's happening internally, because there are really two big stories being told. One is about the literal sweeping up stars from the moon. Yeah, I don't think I ever thought I'd use that phrase. Yes, the literal sweeping up stars from the moon. And the other one is about the psychic drama that's going on as this little boy is trying to figure out who he is. This is a coming of age story, and he's really struggling with wanting to be like his dad and wanting to be like his grandfather and being told different things about who he is and what it means to be that person. This one's actually going to chart not the psychic development as much as that actual what. So we start with exposition. That's starting exposition. Get basis. We need to know. You can't just dive into. Well, you can, but it's tricky. Dive into. And we need to know where we are. We need to know what's happening. So we get this basic up in that first or so, or even less than a minute, as we find out that we have a boat, and we begin to make inferences about the characters, that there are characters in a boat, that they seem to be 3 generations in one family, that there's a lot of similarity, and that this little boy is here for his first time. He gets his hat, and that's very exciting, and it's this very special moment. And we can get all that. We actually get it all visually, which is really exciting, but we get all that in that exposition. That sets the stage for us. We know where we're at. Then you need some sort of inciting incident or inciting moment. And for us, that is when the moon has risen and this gigantic ladder is brought out. That is what's setting all of the rest of the plot events in motion, is sending this little boy up to the moon, and then when the 2 older men follow him as well. Rising action is going just along, kind of up that curve, and that's what's going to lead us to some sort of crisis. So the rising action here, we get the sweeping up of the stars. We also get some conflict that's showing up as the grandfather is very emphatic about wanting him to use this one type of broom, whereas his father really thinks a different type of broom is the best. So we have this really interesting tension that's showing up, and we have the basic rising action of we need to clean up all these stars. Now, that's not quite a story yet. It's nice and lovely, but it doesn't maybe catch our attention in the same way as what happens next. And that's the crisis. We have this gigantic star come and land, and it's this moment of awe, it's this moment of beauty, but it's also this moment of, well, how are we going to clean that up? And so the dad tries, and the grandfather tries, and they're not able to clean this star up. And that leads us to the climax. And the climax is when the little boy climbs up on top of the star, goes like that with his hammer, and smashes it into tons of little stars that are perfectly able to clean up. That is the climax. He's fixed it. It's the kind of big moment of tension, and then after that we need to trail off. We need to kind of have some sort of resolution. It's called the falling action, or the denouement. And we move into that as he gets his own little rake, and he starts raking up the stars, and that moment is a falling action. It's a kind of closing and giving us closure for so much. Not only that plot line of, oh no, there's a giant star, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to clean the moon? But also the plot line of, who is this little boy? Who's he going to follow after? What is his style going to be for the type of work that he's doing? So you can see that throughout all of this tiny little short, right, we only have 6 minutes, they covered the full gambit of this type of well-told story plot line, the trajectory that we see plots most often taking.